إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Then first of all, Jazakumullah khairan for the brothers for inviting me along here, and apologies for the late start. And the book that we are hoping to begin with and go through is on the topic of the salah, the prayer, because of obviously the crucial importance that we're all aware of, inshaAllah, the crucial importance of the salah, the prayer. After the shahada, from the 5 pillars of Islam, obviously the shahada comes first. A person enters into Islam with the shahada, the testification that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, and the testification that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. So that testification is what enters a person into Islam and necessitates that he makes all of his worship for Allah the Most High alone. And the second part of the shahada, that he makes all of that worship that he makes for Allah alone, he makes it in accordance with the sunnah of Allah's messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that first part of that first pillar of Islam necessitates that he corrects his aqeedah, his creed and belief, for that is the foundation which all of the rest of his actions will be built upon correct belief. And then after that first testification, that first pillar of Islam, of course, comes the second pillar of Islam that will come upon the Muslim 5 times a day, which is the salat. So it is an act of worship that is next in importance from the pillars of Islam, and is a practical implementation of that worship of his Lord, the salah. So the book that we are going to go through, inshallah, is not a very large book, and it is the book شروط الصلاة وأركانها وواجباتها. It's a book of Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn Abd al-Wahhāb raḥimahullāh, entitled The Conditions of the Prayer and its pillars and its obligations. And usually I tend to avoid going through books that have already been translated. So if a book's already been translated, then the work has to some extent been done. So I tend to avoid that. But we agreed that we would go through this book because of the importance, and then afterwards I found out there is a translation available for this book. So, and for the explanation as well. So that's available there. An explanation of the conditions, pillars and requirements of the prayer of Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn Abd al-Wahhāb. And the translation has also got 2 of the explanations. Inshallah, we'll use 3 of the explanations of the scholars. 2 of them are included in this translation as well. The explanation of Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jami raḥimahullah, and the explanation of Shaykh al-Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād hafidhahullāh. So whoever's able to get hold of the book, then it is translated. And before beginning with the book, and again apologies for the late start, I don't know how much we'll be able to get through, but we'll make an attempt, inshallah, on asking for Allah's aid and asking Allah that He makes this a means of nearness to Him and a means of acquiring beneficial knowledge. So then the book, the book, as we mentioned, is called Sharh Shurut al-Salat wa Arkaniha wa Wajibatuha. Shurut al-Salat wa Wajibatuha wa Arkaniha wa Wajibatuha. The conditions of the prayer and its pillars and its obligations, as we mentioned by Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn Abd al-Wahhāb raḥimahullah. And the explanations that we'll use, inshaAllah, there are 3 explanations, and there'll be some degree of overlap with the explanations, but even so there'll be, inshaAllah, benefit there. It won't be exactly the same thing from each one. There may be some overlap, but inshaAllah there'll be extra benefit from each of them. And extra emphasis will therefore be attained, inshallah. It will be easier to understand if we hear the same thing more than once, inshallah. So the explanations that we'll use, inshallah, are the explanations that are available in the translation, the explanation of Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jami, raḥimahullāh, the explanation of Shaykh al-Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād, hafidhahullāh, and also, that's been recently transcribed, the explanation of Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, raḥimahullah. So just to begin with a brief, it's going to have to be a very brief sketch, an overview of, first of all, the author, even though he's famous and well known, as are the explainers, but just to mention a very, very brief biography of the author and then of the three explainers. So firstly, the author of the book, then the famous scholar, Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn al-Wahhāb, whose kunya was Abu Abdullah, the father of Abdullah, at-Tamimi al-Najdi. And he was born in the city of al-Uyayna, obviously in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, born in the year 1115, which is approximately 300 years ago. Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn Abdul Wahhāb, he began his studies with his father. He was born, as we said, in the town of Uyayna, in the east of Saudi Arabia. And he began his studies with his father, Shaykh Abdul Wahhāb ibn Sulaiman. And his father was a scholar of fiqh, a major scholar of fiqh in his time, and was a judge. So he learnt first of all with his father. And then he performed the Hajj, travelling to Mecca, and he took from some of the scholars of Mecca, some of the scholars of the Haram. And then he went to al-Madinah, and he learnt from some of the scholars there. And from the scholars he took from in al-Madinah were Shaykh Abdullah ibn Ibrahim ibn Sayf al-Najdi, and also the famous scholar Shaykh Muhammad Hayat al-Sindi, original an Indian scholar who settled in al-Madinah, Shaykh Muhammad Hayat al-Sindi. Then Shaykh al-Islam ibn Abdul Wahhāb, he travelled to seek knowledge to Iraq, to the city of Basra, and he took from the scholars there. And it was there that he began the call to Tawheed, calling people to Tawheed, to the worship of Allah alone, and calling people to the Sunnah, and warning against the shirk that was rampant, and warning against the innovations that had spread throughout the nation. So he proceeded upon learning and upon calling. And then and there are many incidents, and whoever can read the biography of the Shaykh, then there are many beneficial stories involved in his biography. But to cut the long story short, then he eventually travelled back to his own land. When his spending, what he had to spend became little, he returned to his homeland, returned to Najd, eastern Saudi Arabia. And again studied with his father, and he also studied and paid particular attention to the books of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam Ibn al-Qayyim. And he called the people in his homeland, in Najd, called the people to Tawheed, and called the people to the Sunnah, and called the people to the correct Salafi Aqeedah, and warned them against the shirk that many of them were involved in. And he had patience upon that, and he strove hard in that. And then he settled in the town of Dir'iyah in the year 1158 and carried on with his da'wah. And eventually, after many incidents, he was aided by an amir, a local chief, who was Muhammad ibn Saud. And through that, Allah brought about through their efforts great benefit to that land, to Najd, and that benefit spread and spread until it spread to the whole of Arabia and then beyond. Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhāb, he wrote many beneficial works. From them, the famous works, some of the famous ones, Kitab al-Tawheed, books that are still studied from that day to this day. Kitab al-Tawheed, and Kashf al-Shubuhat, and Thalathat al-Usul, and the abridgment of Zād al-Ma'ād, and many books that are well known, and many of the books have been taught and you'll be well aware of. And the Shaykh and the Imam, he died in the year 1206, 1206, raḥimahullāh. So that's the author of the book, Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn al-Wahhāb. As for the explainers whose explanation we'll use to help to understand the book, now firstly, the great Shaykh, the very famous Shaykh, who died not too long ago, and Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Abdullah ibn Baz, raḥimahullah, well known as Shaykh ibn Baz, raḥimahullah. And very briefly, with regard to his life, then he was born in the year 1330. In other words, 100 years ago, nearly. He was born in the city of Riyadh. When he was young, he had eyesight, and then his eyesight became weak, and then he lost his eyesight altogether at the age of 20. So for the rest of the Shaykh's life, he was blind. He memorized the Quran before reaching the age of puberty, and then he strove hard in seeking knowledge with the scholars in Riyadh. After Riyadh, the well-known capital of Saudi. And from the ones he studied with was the Mufti at the time, the Mufti of the kingdom, Shaykh Muḥammad ibn Ibrahim al-Shaykh. After completing his studies, then he took charge of a number of affairs. He was given a number of positions. Firstly, he was appointed as a judge in the place of Al-Kharaj. Then he took on teaching in the Educational Institute in Riyadh, and then in the College of Sharia in Riyadh. And then he was appointed as a vice deputy of Medina University when it first opened in 1381, which is now almost 50 years ago. When it first opened, he was appointed as the deputy head, the vice head of the university. And then he was appointed for a period of 5 years as the overall head of the university. Then he was moved to Riyadh. By order, he was moved to Riyadh to be head of the scholarly committee, the Committee of Scholarly Verdicts and Research, and eventually he was appointed the official mufti, the deliverer of religious verdicts for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He wrote a large number of works, and again some of them, or many of them, or a number of them have been translated, and you can get hold of, in Arabic, a large number of tapes from his recorded lectures. And the works of Shaykh ibn Baz, raḥimahullah, have been compiled in 30 volumes. 30 volumes. And the Shaykh is well known for having spent, if you read about his particular days, how he spent each day, then the whole of his time was spent either in the prayer, or in remembrance of Allah, or in teaching, or in giving daʿwah, or in helping people, having people come make requests and helping them wherever he could help them, and in responding to questions, direct questions or telephone questions. And the Shaykh died, raḥimahullah, in the year 1420 in Riyadh. That was about 12 years ago. The Shaykh died, raḥimahullah. The second explanation that we'll use, inshaAllah, is the explanation of Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jami, whose kunya was Abu Ahmad. And Shaykh Muhammad Aman, he was originally from Habasha, from Abyssinia, Ethiopia, that area. From an area called Harar, from a village called Taghātāb, and he was born in the year 1349. Shaykh Muhammad Aman, he learned the Quran while he was young, and he studied the Shafi'i fiqh, and he studied the books of the language, all in his own land. And then he wished to travel to Mecca to perform Hajj and to seek knowledge. And he travelled along with another student, and they became close companions. The two of them travelled together. And that journey itself, there's a number of stories related to that journey itself. It was a difficult journey. You can imagine in those days, 70 years ago or the like, it was a very difficult journey. First they travelled by land, then they travelled by ship, and the ship was thrown off course. They ended up in Yemen, and they travelled on foot. They came to Hudaydah in Yemen, and they fasted the month of Ramadan there. And they carried on foot, and eventually they approached Mecca and entered Mecca, and there he performed the Hajj and sought knowledge in Mecca, Shaykh Muhammad Aman, raḥimahullāh. And he excelled in his studies. And he performed the Hajj in the year 1369, and then remained in Mecca and sought knowledge there. So in Mecca he came across the sheikhs and studied with the sheikhs who were there, and amongst them were the sheikh that was already just mentioned, Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz, raḥimahullah. And he accompanied him closely and travelled along with him. When Shaykh bin Baz moved to Riyadh, he moved along with him to Riyadh. When the Scholarly Institute was opened in Riyadh, Educational Institute was opened there, he travelled. Shaykh Muhammad Aman went along with him. And there in Riyadh he studied again with the Mufti there, Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Shaykh, who was a Mufti before Shaykh bin Baz. He studied with him. And he studied with Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Ifriqi. And he studied with Shaykh Muhammad Amin al-Shanqiti, and Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari, and Shaykh Abdul Razak Afifi, and Shaykh Abdullah al-Qar'awi, and many of the sheikhs that he studied with them. And he completed his studies, his secondary studies in Riyadh, and then he took a degree in Sharia. And he carried on from elsewhere. He did his masters, he did his PhD, and so on. And from then on he engaged in teaching and daʿwah and travelling to give daʿwah. And he was sent as a teacher to the southern part of Saudi Arabia, Samita, in the area of Jazan. And then when the University of Medina was opened, he was sent to teach in Medina when the university first opened. And then he also taught in the Masjid al-Nabawi. And concerning Shaykh Muhammad Aman, and as just to mention again, none of this does justice to any of these sheikhs, it's far too brief, but just to give a very brief idea of who these sheikhs were. So concerning him, Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz said that he is well known to me for knowledge and virtue and having good aqeedah, and for working hard in giving da'wah, calling to Allah the Perfect, and warning against innovations and warning against superstitions. Shaykh Muhammad Aman, he wrote a number of works in the field of aqeedah, correct, Salafi aqeedah, and on the Sunnah, and with regard to the affair of da'wah. And he died, raḥimahullah, after an illness that lasted for around about a year. He died in the year 1416 in Al-Madinah, and was buried, raḥimahullah, in Al-Baqi', the graveyard in Al-Madinah, raḥimahullah. And as for the third explanation, then the explanation of Shaykh al-Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād, who is still a teacher there now in Medina. If you go to the masjid in Medina, you'll find Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin, may Allah preserve him, still teaching to this day. So he is Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin ibn Hamd ibn Abdul Muḥsin ibn Abdullah al-Badr, from the family of Badr. And he's called al-ʿAbbād after his great-grandfather Abdullah, who is known as al-ʿAbbād. So he's known as Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād or Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin al-Badr. His family, the people of Badr, they are from the tribe of Jalas, or from the people of Jalas, which is from the tribe of Anaza, who are descended from Adnan, the original Arabs, Adnaniyya. He was born in the year 1353. So the Shaykh is about 80 years old. Yeah, almost 79, 80 years old, or thereabouts. The Shaykh was born in the town of Az-Zulfi, and he grew up in that town. Az-Zulfi, again, is in the east of Arabia, east of Saudi Arabia. He grew up there and began his studies there. And he began learning with the scholars of Az-Zulfi, and then he studied with other scholars besides, such as again the Mufti, Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Shaykh, and he studied with Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti, and Shaykh ibn Baz, and Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Ifriqi, and Shaykh Abdul Razak Afifi, and other scholars. And the first time he performed Hajj was in the year 1370, so at the age of about 17. And then he studied in the Educational Institute in Riyadh, and then having qualified, he studied in the College of Sharia, Islamic Law in Riyadh. And he came top of the class. When it first opened, he studied there, and he came top of the class, and there were 80 or more people in that class, and he came first place. Then in the year 1380, so at the age of 27, he moved on to teach in that Educational Institute. And then after the Islamic University of Medina opened, he was taken there to teach there. And in fact, he was the first person who ever gave a lesson in the University of Medina. He was the one. The first lesson that was ever given there was given by Shaykh al-Muḥsin. So he was there right from the start of the university. Then he taught in the first college that was there, the College of Sharia, Islamic Law, which was the first college there. Then he also taught, as he does to this day, and may Allah preserve him, in the Masjid al-Nabawi, in the Prophet's Mosque. He taught also there. And he has, in the Prophet's Mosque, over a period of 24 years, he finished just 2 or 3 years ago, he has taught all of the 6 books of Hadith, Bukhari and Muslim and the 4 Sunan. He has taught each one of them, going through Hadith by Hadith, explaining. He's completed that, and now, recently, he began again from the start with the Sahih of al-Bukhari. And the Shaykh is still there explaining now. In the year 1393, he was appointed as the vice president of the university under Shaykh bin Baz. And then when Shaykh bin Baz was taken to Riyadh, then Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin became the head of the university. And there are many stories concerning that we don't have time to go into. Some of them you'll mention as these biographies. A lot of what has been mentioned here, you'll find it in the translation if you get hold of it, inshallah. And there are many stories in that regard. And that the care and attention that he would give to his duties in the university. That Shaykh Hamad, just for example, Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari, raḥimahullāh, the Muhaddith of Medina, that one time he knew how early that the Shaykh would be there, Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin, how early he would be there. So he said, one time I wanted to get to the university before him. So therefore I went right at the time when it should be opened, to try and get there before him, before the president. So he said, however, when I got there, I found out the one who was opening the gate was Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin himself, the president. He was the one who opened the gate. So he couldn't beat him to it. So and there are many stories that there isn't time to mention, but hafidhahullāh. He has many works and many tapes of his lessons that you can get hold of, and his works have been gathered into 11 volumes. And concerning him, Shaykh Hamad al-Ansari, raḥimahullah, said, my 2 eyes have not seen the like of him in wara', in piety. Hafidhahullah ta'ala. Then with regard to the book, then to make a start on the book with the explanation and take what we are able to in this time that's available, inshaAllah. Then as we said, the book Sharh Shurut al-Salat wa Arkaniha wa Wajibatiha, an explanation of the book, the pillars of the prayer, or the conditions of the prayer, and its pillars and its obligations of Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn Abdul Wahhāb. Then he begins the book, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, with the name of Allah, the extremely merciful, the bestower of mercy. In introduction to the book, just so that we know what the book exactly is, then Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād said, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the extremely merciful, the bestower of mercy. All praise is for Allah, the Lord of the whole of creation, and may Allah extol and send peace and bless His servant and His messenger, our Prophet Muḥammad, and his true followers and his companions, all of them. To proceed. Then this is an explanation of the treatise of Shaykh al-Islām Muḥammad ibn Abdul Wahhāb raḥimahullah, and it comprises the shurut, the conditions of the prayer, and its pillars, its arkan, and its wajibat, its obligatory duties. So I say this treatise comprises the 9 conditions of the prayer and its 14 pillars and its 8 obligations. And when he raḥimahullah mentioned the 4th condition from the conditions of the prayer, which is to remove hadath, remove anything which breaches purification, then he mentioned the conditions of purification, tahara, which are 10. And the 6 obligatory duties of wudu, and its wajib, its obligation, which is to mention Allah's name, the Bismillah, when you remember. And he mentioned the 8 things which break it, which break purification. And whilst he spoke about the conditions of the prayer, he explained Surah Al-Fatiha briefly, and he explained the wordings of the initial supplication and the wordings of the tashahhud. On the same point, meaning with regard to introduction of the book and what it deals with, then Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, raḥimahullah, he said, all praise is for Allah, and may Allah extol and send peace upon Allah's Messenger and upon his true followers and his companions and whoever follows his way to proceed. Then this is a treatise which the ulama, the scholars, used to teach to the people and to the congregation in the mosques, along with the book al-Usul al-Thalatha. Meaning, the scholars used to teach Usul al-Thalatha to the people with regard to Aqidah, and with regard to fiqh, they'd begin with the like of this, with this book here. Teaching it to the people and teaching it to the congregations in the mosque, so that they could acquire knowledge and understanding of the fundamentals of their religion, and of the description of the prayer and its pillars and its obligations, because the Muslim has need of that. And the author is the Shaykh, the Imam Muḥammad ibn al-Wahhāb ibn Sulaiman ibn Ali at-Tamimi, rahmatullahi alayh, who was the Shaykh al-Islām in his time, and who was the Mujaddid, the reviver, for that which had been wiped away from the outward signs of Islam in the second half of the 12th century in this Arabian peninsula, and he died in the year 1206 after the Hijrah. Then Shaykh al-Islam, he begins the book by saying, Shurūt al-Salati tis'ah, the conditions of the prayer are 9. Al-Islāmu wal-Aqlu wa-Tamyīzu wa-Raf'u al-Hadath wa-Izālatu al-Najāsa wa-Satru al-Awra wa-Dukhūlu al-Waqt wa-Istiqbālu al-Qibla wa-Niyya. That he said, beginning the main text of the book, he said, the conditions of the prayer, the shurūt, the conditions of the prayer are 9. Islam, and whoever can do so should memorize these, inshaAllah, because the importance of it. That the conditions, the shurūt of the prayer are 9. Islam, and al-aql, sanity, and at-tamyiz, distinction between right and wrong, being the age of distinction, or the age of discernment rather. Wa raf'ul hadath, and removing that which is breaks purification. Wa izalatu najasa, and removal of any impurity. Wa satrul awra, and covering the awra, that which needs to be covered in the prayer. Wa dukhulul waqt, and that the prayer time has begun, has entered. وَاسْتِقْبَالُ الْقِبْلَةِ, and facing the qibla. وَالنِّيَّةِ, and the intention. Concerning these 9 conditions that the explainers will mention one by one, and we'll take one by one inshaAllah. Then Shaykh Muhammad Aman said in his explanation, the author raḥimahullah, he counted the 9 shurut, the 9 conditions for the prayer: Islam, and sanity, and discernment, and removal of that which breaks purification, and removal of impurity, and covering the awrah, covering that which needs to be covered, and that the prayer time has entered, meaning having knowledge, knowing that the prayer time has started, that the person who is going to pray knows that the time has begun. These are the conditions. So the author raḥimahullah, he began to explain this himself, so that does not need further explanation. Then to begin with the first of these, I'll carry on until I get some sort of sign where they stop or something. To begin with the first of these then, الشرط الأول, Shaykh al-Islam said, الشرط الأول al-Islām وضده الكفر والكافر عمله مردود ولو عمل أي عمل والدليل قوله تعالى ما كان للمشركين أن يعمروا مساجد الله شاهدين على أنفسهم بالكفر أولئك حبطت أعمالهم وفي النار هم خالدون. الآية 17 من سورة التوبة. قال تعالى وقدمنا إلى ما عملوا من عمل فجعلناه هباء منثورا. الآية 23 من سورة الفرقان. He's saying the first condition. So he mentions now the first of the 9 conditions. He says the first condition is Islam, and its opposite is kufr, is disbelief. And the kafir, the disbeliever, his actions are rejected, whatever action he may do. And the proof is his saying, He the Most High. And he quotes the ayah from Surah At-Tawbah, the 9th surah, ayah 17, with the ayah ما كان للمشركين أن يعمروا مساجد الله شاهدين على أنفسهم بالكفر أولئك حبطت أعمالهم وفي النار هم خالدون. The ayah with the explanation, it is not right for the people of shirk to maintain the mosques of Allah whilst they bear witness against themselves of disbelief. Those ones, their deeds are null and void, and they will be forever in the hellfire. Then he quotes a second evidence for this. He said, He the Most High said, and he quotes the ayah from Surah Al-Furqan, the 25th surah, ayah 23, with the explanation. Or the ayah, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. With the explanation, and we shall turn to whatever deeds they did, and we shall make them as floating dust particles. On this point, with regard to the first condition of the prayer, the condition of Islam, then Shaykh al-Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād said, he's saying the first condition is Islam, and its opposite is kufr, disbelief. And the disbeliever, his deeds are rejected, whatever deeds he does. And the proof is his saying, He the Most High, ما كان للمشركين أن يعمروا مساجد الله شاهدين على أنفسهم بالكفر أولئك حبطت أعمالهم وفي النار هم خالدون. The ayah that we heard from Surah At-Tawbah, ayah 17, with explanation again. It is not right for the people of shirk that they should maintain the mosques of Allah whilst they witness against themselves of disbelief. Those ones, then their deeds are null and void, and in the fire they will remain forever. Then he said, and he's saying, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. Surah Al-Furqan, the ayah we heard again, Surah Al-Furqan, ayah 23, with the explanation, and we shall turn to whatever deeds they did, and we shall make them as scattered floating dust particles. The Shaykh said, Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin, every action which a person does to draw closer to Allah amongst this nation, it will not benefit the person unless it is preceded. Whatever deed the Muslim does, no matter what it is, it will not benefit him unless it is preceded by the shahada, the testification, La ilaha illallah, that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and that he is upon these two. So there has to be ikhlas, that he makes his deeds purely and sincerely for Allah, which is what is necessitated by the testification that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah. I mean, he has to be a person who makes all of his worship, for any of it to be accepted, makes all of his worship for Allah alone. He said, which is what is necessitated by the testification that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah. And there must be mutaba'ah, following the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is what is necessitated by the testification that Muhammad is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And every action which the disbeliever, the kafir, does, then it will not benefit him with Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, because it is lacking in the condition of Islam. It lacks that condition of Islam. And the Shaykh raḥimahullāh, he used as proof that the actions of the disbelievers will be rejected and that they will not be accepted 2 ayahs from Surah At-Tawbah and Surah Al-Furqan. Because the ayah from Surah At-Tawbah is concluded by the statement that the deeds of the disbelievers will be null and void. And the ayah from Surah Al-Furqan made clear that their actions will not be counted at all, and that they will become just like scattered dust particles, meaning they will become null and void and they will vanish. On this same point, Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz raḥimahullah, he said, the first condition is Islam, meaning that from when the person begins his prayer until he exits from it, he must be a Muslim. So if he prays salat whilst he is a kafir, a disbeliever, then his prayer will not be correct, because of his saying, He the Majestic and Most High. And he quotes the ayah again from Surah At-Tawbah, ما كان للمشركين أن يعمروا مساجد الله شاهدين على أنفسهم بالكفر أولئك حبطت أعمالهم وفي النار هم خالدون. Again with the explanation, it is not right for the people of shirk to maintain the mosques of Allah whilst they witness against themselves of disbelief. Those ones, their deeds will be rendered null and void, and they will be forever in the hellfire. He said, and his saying, He the Majestic and Most High, وَلَوْ أَشْرَكُوا لَحَبِطَ عَنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Surah Al-An'am, the 6th surah, ayah 153, with the explanation. And if they were to commit shirk, if they were to associate others with Allah, then whatever deeds they did would become null and void. He said, and his saying, He the Perfect, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالْإِيمَانِ فَقَدْ حَبِطَ عَمَلُهُ. Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th surah, ayah 5, with the explanation. And whoever rejects Iman, whoever rejects true faith, then his deeds will be rendered null and void. He said, and his saying, He the Perfect, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. The ayah again from Surah Al-Furqan, ayah 23, with the explanation. And we shall turn to whatever deeds they did, and we will make them just like scattered dust particles. So the Shaykh said, so every person who is judged to be a kafir, a disbeliever, then his prayer, his salat, if he prays it, his prayer will not be correct. So if he prayed before he entered into Islam, it will not be correct unless and until he enters into Islam. And finally, on this first condition, the Shaykh Muhammad Aman said, the disbeliever, his deeds are rejected, no matter what deed he does. This is the meaning of its being a condition. meaning the absence of Islam necessitates absence of the prayer, and that any action he does will not be correct, because the disbeliever, no action will be accepted from him. And all deeds, all righteous deeds, have as a condition for them Islam. And the proof is his saying, He the Most High, and again he quotes the ayah from Surah At-Tawbah, ما كان للمشركين أن يأمروا مساجد الله شاهدين على أنفسهم بالكفر أولئك حبطت أعمالهم وفي النار هم خالدون. Again with the explanation, it is not right for the people of shirk to maintain the mosques of Allah whilst they witness against their own selves with disbelief. Their deeds will be rendered null and void, and in the fire they will remain forever. So the witness is habitat a'maluhum, their deeds will be rendered null and void. And his saying, He the Most High, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. With the explanation, and we shall turn to whatever deeds they did, and we shall make them just like scattered dust particles. The Shaykh said, meaning, they will not receive reward for them. Inshallah. We'll take the second condition, inshallah, and then we'll break, inshallah. Then Shaykh al-Islām, he mentions ash-shart al-thani, the second condition. Or what we'll do something, we'll leave it at the first condition, and we'll mention something which I left out, which we'll mention, inshallah. With regard to the phrase, so we had just the one condition, the first of the conditions, which is the condition of Islam. The first condition that's necessary for a person's prayer to be acceptable is that he be upon Islam. Then, what should have come before this is, with regard to the phrase shurut al-salati tis'atun, the conditions of the prayer are 9. The shurut for the prayer are 9. The conditions of the prayer are 9. Then there's the issue of what is a condition? What does it mean that something is a condition? With regard to this point, then Shaykh al-Muḥsin al-ʿAbbād said, shurut al-salat, the conditions of the prayer. This should have come before the first condition. So it shows us the wisdom of not rushing affairs. So the first matter is, what is a condition? What is a shart? Plural of which is shurut. So Shaykh Abdul Muḥsin said, shurut al-salat, the conditions of the prayer. He said, shurut, this is the plural of shart, a condition. Then he defines it. And a shart, a condition, is الشرط هو الذي يلزم من عدمه العدم ولا يلزم من وجوده وجود. A condition is that which, if it is absent, it necessitates absence of that which is conditional upon it. However, its being present does not necessitate the presence of the other thing, the presence of that which it is conditional upon it. Inshallah, the meaning will become clear from the explanation, inshallah. A condition is that which, if it's not present, if the condition is not there, the thing will not be present, will not be there, won't count. But if the condition is there, it doesn't necessitate that the thing itself that depends upon it will be correct. He said, the meaning is that if a person is not upon purification, his prayer will not be correct. I mean, purification is a condition for the prayer. The prayer has a condition, purification. Purification is a condition. If he doesn't have that condition, he is not upon purification, that necessitates that the prayer will not be correct. Because purification is a condition, a shart, for the prayer. Because he, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, said, لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. Allah will not accept the prayer of one of you if he breaks his purification until he makes wudu. Hadith reported by al-Bukhari as hadith 6954 and Muslim as hadith 537 from hadith Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. Then he said, Whereas a person may make the wudu, but then he might break it again without having prayed, with that initial wudu. So the fact that purification was present doesn't mean that the prayer is necessarily going to be present. As for the explanation of Shaykh Muhammad Aman, then he said, we need to make a distinction, also a difference between that which is a shart, a condition, and that which is a pillar. Both these things that we need to know, a shart, a condition, and a pillar, a rukn, both things mean are something essential. And just to finish off this point, Shaykh Muhammad Aman said we need to make a distinction between what's a shart, a condition, and what is a pillar, a rukn. And in reality, both things are essential. They're essential for the thing that depends upon them. But he makes, well, what's the difference then between a shart, a condition, and between a rukn, a pillar? He said, a shart is that which, if it is not found, then the thing that depends upon it will also not be found. But if it is found, it doesn't necessitate that the other thing will necessarily be there. Then he explains it. The explanation will make it clear, inshallah, again. He said, meaning, if a person doesn't have purification, that necessitates the prayer will not be correct. However, if he does have purification, that doesn't necessitate that the prayer will occur. For a person might make the wudu, but then not pray. So this is the meaning of their saying, it is that which is, if it is not present, it necessitates that the thing that depends upon it will not be present. If it's not there, the thing that depends upon it won't be there. But if it is present, it doesn't necessitate necessarily that that thing that depends upon it will be the case. So unless the person actually goes on to pray, he makes purification, which is a condition for the prayer. Unless he actually goes on to then pray, of course the prayer will not be correct. It won't be there. As for a rukn, a pillar, then a rukn, a pillar, is something that is within the thing itself. It is the actual essence of the thing itself. In other words, a condition is something outside the act. For example, we have the prayer. A condition for the prayer is something outside the prayer. It's necessary for the prayer, but it's actually outside the prayer itself. Whereas a rukn of the prayer is an essential thing that's actually within the prayer. It's actual part, intrinsic part of the prayer. That is a rukn. So he said, so the arkan of the prayer, the pillars of the prayer, they are the actual core of the prayer itself, within the prayer. They are the reality, they form the reality of the prayer. Because the prayer consists of sayings and actions, which together make up the prayer, those sayings and actions. So these sayings and actions, they compose and comprise and make up the prayer. So those things that make up this act of worship, which is the prayer, they compose it from the inside. They are the pillars, the arkan. Whereas the conditions, the shurut of the prayer, are mostly things which are outside it, outside the actual prayer itself. And then he goes on to make a point of difference that we'll leave it makes a difference that they differ. For example, I'll just summarize what the point is. They differ about the niyyah, the intention in the prayer. Do we say the niyyah, intention of the prayer, do we call it? It's essential. You have to have correct intention to pray for your prayer to be accepted. You can't just pray, do the actions, you don't know what you're doing. You have to have the correct intention. But so the intention is essential. But do we call it a condition, or do we call it a pillar? That's why the Shafi'i scholars and the Hanbali scholars differ, because some of them say the intention, it comes outside the prayer. You make your intention before you pray. So intention is actually outside the prayer, so therefore we call it a shart, we call it a condition. Whereas some of the Hanbali scholars, they say no. They say the intention, you can't just make it before and then give up, and that's the end of it. The intention goes all the way through the prayer. Your intention is from the start, before the prayer, carries on at the start of the prayer, carries on all the way to the end of the prayer. So the intention is within the prayer. So therefore they say that the intention, the niyyah, is a rukn, is a pillar of the prayer, because it's within the prayer. And Shaykh Muhammad Aman makes clear, this is just, it's a verbal difference, it's not a major difference that's going to cause a problem. Because in either case, it's essential that you have the intention. It's just how do we classify it? Being something outside the prayer or being something inside the prayer. Finally, Shaykh Abdul Aziz Ibn Baz said, this is what is well known with the people of knowledge, that a condition is that which, if it is present, it doesn't necessitate presence of the actual thing. But if it is not found, if the condition is not found, that which depends upon it will not be the case, will not exist. So whenever the condition is not present, that which depends upon it, in this case the prayer, will not be correct. However, the mere fact that it is present, one condition is present, will not bring about the thing until the person completes all of the other conditions and all of the obligations and all of the duties. So he needs to complete, it's not enough, in other words, it's not enough that a person does one of the conditions of the prayer and leaves the rest. He has to do fulfill all of them, right to the end of them, so that his prayer can be correct. Walhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad. So that's what a condition is. And we had the actual first condition for the correctness of the prayer, which is Islam. Walhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad. And again, sorry for the late arrival and therefore having to rush. Allahumma musta'an. Wa subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.